All right, welcome to the Made to Thrive show. I'm your host, SteveStavs, Africa's pro biohacker, and I've got a very unique guest on the show. His name is Victor Sagalovsky. He's a Russian-born polymath scientist. He's a health pioneer, he's a cinematographer, and he's an expert in water and gold. He's got the most fascinating background that we're going to just jump into. And it's such a privilege to have him on the show because I've been researching deuterium depleted water for many years, about 5 years. I've been drinking Canton seawater minerals for probably 10 years, injecting it into the body probably for about 12 years since I first came into contact with Canton. So it's a privilege to have you on the show, Victor. Welcome.
Thank you, Steve. Wonderful introduction. Thank you so much for having me.
Cool. I want to start with just your little bit of a short background, how you got into health. You've studied film, you've studied BA, you've been, I think, is a Hawaii, you've been around the world, you've got a rich background, which is, I think it's been probably really helpful. But if you can give us a short backstory, and then I want to dive into the 7 pillars of Made to Thrive. I do want to talk about deuterium depleted water, hydrogen rich water, structured water, probably Laszlo Boris. I want to talk about Jack Cruz, who's been on the show twice. He's our most downloaded guest throughout the world. I do want to talk about Gerard Pollack and exclusion zone water. So there's a lot to cover here, and I'm just giving you a little bit of framework. Obviously, the first time we've met, but give us a quick backstory, Victor.
How far back do you want to go?
Just as far back as you want to go. Just keep it probably short and sweet so people can get an idea of who you are.
Well, I've been interested in the health space ever since I was a kid. I was a kind of like an armchair gerontologist, always looking at trying to figure out what makes people age. I always thought that was like the most fundamental problem that we have on this planet, is that we're born, we're young, and then we're old, and then we die. And so I was just wondering, why isn't anybody asking these questions? So I started investigating into this kind of armchair gerontology pursuit, and I was actually from a very young age, and it kind of guided that and the fact that I wasn't very healthy growing up. It kind of guided me on my own path of trying to understand what this whole thing is about. We're born, I think, with all the tools that we need for anything we want, including long, healthy life. The problem is we don't have the manual. So we're born and we're not given the manual. So in my early 20s, I started on this path and of research, study, science, and for me, it was about seeking out the right teachers and having the right questions. So and I just this is fantastic, because I saw as I put things out there over the last 30 years, ideas that may have acted on or things that I maybe didn't act on, but knew, I see that knowledge manifesting 5, 10, 15 years down the line. So it's very thrilling, because you see that the conclusions that you may come to are actually going to be accepted by a wider stream of audience. And why not? We're all human, so every human contribution helps.
Great. So tell us what your mission is. I mean, what if you want to leave a legacy, and we unpack this at Made to Thrive. We got a little acronym called TGIM. Thank God it's Monday. And we're really trying to swing it from TGIF, because people are waiting for weekends, they're waiting for holidays. And we believe that purpose is one of probably the most important, or one of the most important sort of pillars to stand on, because without purpose, you battle to make the nutritional changes. You battle to drink deuterium depleted water if it's too expensive. You battle to make time for yourself. But one of the internal drivers being purpose and sort of your mission. What is your mission that people can sort of just say, Victor stood for this, and this was his cause, and this is what he brought on planet Earth?
I love that. It's I love the Monday part of it, because it's like, what gets you out of bed in the morning, right? So at this point in my life, it's deuterium depletion. The more people that get turned on to this lifestyle, deuterium depleted lifestyle, and let me just explain that it doesn't necessarily always involve water, the deuterium depleted water, although that will get you to deplete your deuterium levels much faster. But it's about this. What I would like to share with people is just just if you copy what I do, you'll be very happy.
Oh, that sounds good.
Yeah, that's the simple truth, because I've been doing all this biohacking, early on, more as a selfish endeavor, just for myself. How healthy can I be at any age, and how balanced can I be? So this is where I'm at now, and it's pretty good. And deuterium depletion, I would say, is the crown of any strategy for health.
Okay, well, let's start at the sort of mitochondrial level. My audience or my listeners and those viewers have some type of education in this area, maybe just unpack the mitochondria, complex 5, the ATPase synthase, and how that works, and what deuterium is, and why is it so important for people to deplete the deuterium of the body in order to stay healthy and have a health span, not only a lifespan, but a health span.
It's great that you asked me this very detailed question, so that I assume that your audience understands these types of topics. So when you get into the electron transport chain and you look at the ATP synthase nanomotor, it's very unique, right? It's the equivalent of saying, looking at this thing is like saying, one, how did it get here? It's a motor generator. It spins at 9,000 RPM. It would never got here through simple evolution. To agree to that would be like saying, how long do you have to leave a block of aluminum out in the sun before it turns into an internal combustion engine? So it's this amazing nanomotor, and it works. It has one simple function, right? So it spins. Its protons come in, and those protons come in, makes this thing spin, and it's sitting between a membrane. So there's a gradient which causes that proton flow, and when it spins, it attracts ADP to become an ATP, right? Puts that phosphate on there, and in the process creates metabolic water. And this is a simple process of how we create the currency of our biology, which is ATP, right? It's all based on those protons. Now, in 2007, Dr. Abdullah Olgun in Turkey discovered that every 15 seconds, roughly in an individual that's consuming about 150 ppm of deuterium depleted water, roughly every 15 seconds, that nanomotor gets impinged on by a deuteron, which is simply a neutron proton pair. So it makes it twice the size of that original proton. So this is not good for the motor, because the motor doesn't have any room for it. It's like putting a square peg in a round hole. So it causes the motor to stutter, jam, no ATP is produced in that moment. And this is cumulative. This happens constantly from the time we're born to the time we die. So this is a big problem. And I believe this is that discovery by Dr. Olgun, that's something that eventually I would hope would win him a Nobel Prize. It's a discovery that it's hard to argue with, because it's purely on the mechanical basis. And when I talked to Abdullah, I asked him, a number of times, I asked him, what made you interested in trying to understand in this deuterium thing in the first place? Because that's a really, again, if you don't get the right answers if you don't ask the right questions. So you have to know how to ask the right questions. So it's like, how did you come to ask this question? And he told me that it's because he looked in the blood plasma, and he saw that there was 4 to 5 times more deuterium in it than the basic nutrients we need for life: glucose, magnesium, potassium, etc. He said, wow, there's a lot of this stuff on a molecular level just in our bodies, and what is it doing? Well, and then you look deeper, you look at the Russian research, and you see it's very simple. The deuterium slows things down. It slows metabolic process. For example, kinetic isotope effect, the carbon deuterium bond takes 9 times slower to dissociate than a carbon hydrogen bond. So it slows things down in nature and metabolically. And the removal of deuterium speeds them up. Now, this was known about through experiments over many decades in Russia, Hungary, Romania, America, other places, other countries, I'm sure as well. The literature is there. However, it wasn't until 2007 that it was proven how it damages the mitochondria. All the way back to the 70s, it was postulated that because deuterium is twice the size of a protein, that it can distort the shape of molecules like enzymes, like stereoisomers. I talk about that in my lectures, then it also can potentially distort the shape of DNA as well, because DNA is primarily hydrogen. So if something is a little bit too big, it changes the geometry, which causes errors in transcription and leading to mutations. But it wasn't until this 2007 that the mitochondrial metabolic solution came, within the actual theory is the actual proof. And then at that point, what happened was other people got interested in this, like Dr. Boros, like Laszlo Boros at UCLA, and then he discovered something even beyond Dr. Olgun. Olgun's pretty much working in a vacuum over there in Turkey, and what Boros discovered was that the Krebs cycle, or the St. Georgi cycle, as Hungarians like to call it, or the citric acid cycle. And anyway, these very complex cycles that only have one function: break down food into protein, into hydrogen. So, and this answered a question. For what he discovered, answered a question that I have been seeking for 15 years, ever since I was in my 20s, going, why is the Krebs cycle so complicated? Because everything in nature is simple, right? Nature looks for the path of least resistance, right? The easiest way forward. In fact, with protium and deuterium, you'll notice that they have different quantum tunneling properties. In fact, if it was only deuterium, we wouldn't be alive, because it doesn't quantum tunnel like hydrogen does. So, and it's another phenomenon that's difficult to explain by modern science. So what Boros figured out is that all these complicated steps in the Krebs cycle, and this is his theory, it started with him, is that they're gates to keep deuterium out of the electron transport chain. So it's a series of hydrogen exchange gates. I said, wow, this is incredible, because even for somebody that doesn't understand the complexities of all these cycles, are very complex, at a level of somebody like Dr. Boros, or anybody that's in biochemistry as a profession, you can still understand the concept of these are gates to keep deuterium out. So everything is trying to keep deuterium out of the electron transport chain. In fact, if you look at our metabolic water, which is really the water that we swim in inside, that water is not water we drink. It's homemade. It's synthesized, and it's synthesized in the inner matrix, in the matrix of the mitochondria, and that water is 60 to 70% deuterium depleted. So that's a little bit of a clue. The body is trying to keep deuterium outside of the electron transport chain. And the other question, when people get this bit of knowledge, their question is why? Well, mitochondria have been part of our genome for 1.45 billion years. Why isn't there no evolutionary adaptation for this? And I argue, well, actually there is, and there was, and that adaptation was to keep us very healthy and long living at a deuterium level somewhere between 120 and 130. And if you look at where this research originally comes from, where this discovery comes from, was in fact these young gerontologists in Siberia in the late 50s trying to figure out why this population of Siberian Yakutians, who live in a very harsh environment, at that time they had no medical care, they probably still don't, and they have minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, 8 months out of the year, no sun most of the time. So why are they have 4 times more centenarians and hardly any other diseases? Well, after a while of trying to figure out, they honed in on the water, they did some testing, and it was 16% lower than what's called Vienna standard mean ocean water, which is 155.76, which is what the ocean is. So, and roughly all drinking water on the planet, but the exception of these nice glacial areas, mountainous areas away from hydrological cycles of the ocean, they'll go below 150 to 140, 130. And so these scientists found out that the biological benefit starts at roughly 133 parts per million.
Sure.
And so you also, just one other thing to consider, if you put yourself back in the 1950s, people doing this research, put yourself in their shoes, because in their shoes, deuterium was only discovered, less than 20 years before. So there's very exciting still that you have this incredible discovery that hydrogen has another isotope, and this and this discovery, it paves the way for atomic energy, for nuclear bombs, for atomic power plants, if it wasn't for the discovery of deuterium. So that was the 20th century where we used deuterium in a explosive sense. And this is the 21st century where we have the ability, with this knowledge that we have, to reduce it, to remove it, not completely, but reduce it to the point where we can gain back some of this evolutionary functions that we had 20,000 years ago.
Great. So let me just sort of distill that, or sort of simplify it. Is the mitochondria is the energy factory of the cell. A lot of these scientists are now saying that most chronic disease, maybe 80%, maybe even 90%, some even saying 95% of all chronic disease is mitochondrial in origin. The mitochondria and the functioning of the mitochondria and moving those electrons in the electron transport chain, and, you know, just moving those protons, which are very important, those hydrogen plus, you know, atoms across that mitochondrial membrane is important in producing ATP. So if our mitochondria are not working correctly, or they're sluggish, or they're slow, this prones us to getting disease. Is that correct?
That's 100% correct. It's actually even worse than that. Because, I mean, consider, you know, mitochondria it was originally a foreign invader into our cell. It came in and infected eukaryotes pretty early in our evolutionary paths, and that's why we have two types of DNA. We have our atomic DNA and mitochondrial DNA. So we're actually made up of these aliens called mitochondria, which are very useful. They became very useful, and their original function was to create water on this planet, right? But then they took over as the primary energy production mechanism of the cell, because ATP is not the only way energy is made in the cell. However, it's the primary way, because when you look at somebody between, let's say somebody's 10 years old and somebody's 90 years old or 80 years old, and you have that time difference. And in that time difference, when you were born, let's say a muscle cell, it's going to have 100,000 mitochondria in it. Okay. By the time you're 60 years older, 60, 70 years older, it's going to have, maybe if you're lucky, 100. So herein lies the problem: is this one, your mitochondria is constantly shutting down. Once it's gone, it's gone. Eventually, you start off with a lot of mitochondria, then you have less, and this is what proton motive force is, or to put it practically, physical energy is all about, right? The reason the 17-year-old athlete can outcompete a 30-year-old athlete is because of only one reason: he's got more mitochondria, or he or she has got more mitochondria. So the longevity topic, the topics that I'm most interested in the what I like to call pro-youthing instead of anti-aging, because it's kind of anti-aging is kind of a double negative. So this pro-youthing space is how long can you stay young? You know, you're going to eventually grow old and die, but how long can you stay young? And that really is a function of your mitochondria. And so a new topic is mitogenesis. The ability not only to preserve mitochondria, but synthesize new mitochondria, and that is possible. And all these things are possible, but they have to exist in a space where you're not constantly fighting against the deuterium in your body, because you're always putting it in. You know, I mean, this is DDW, but if anybody drinking anything, eating anything, you're always adding deuterium into your body. So you have to look at what is going to give me a net energy benefit, because only deuterium depletion, when you look at it fundamentally, will provide a net energy benefit as we age.
Sure.
Everything else will introduce carbon and deuterium into the system, which means it has to be filtered, cleaned, and eventually these systems get compromised. And this is why people have traditionally done well with fasting and ketogenic diets, because they're one-on-one with deuterium depletion.
Got you. And we're going to get into those details, Victor. I've got
Absolutely.
a 17-year-old and I've got a 5-year-old, and I've learned quite a lot since the birth of the two children that I have. And I got a 5-year-old, and I'm saying I've got a clean slate now. And so what do I impart? You know, what are the most important, you know, aspects or pillars? And I interviewed a behavioral scientist, John Levy, and he's written an incredible book called You're Invited: The Art and Science of Cultivating Influence. And he talks about the two most important longevity predictors being social ties, close family and friends, and this first one being social integration and how important that is. And I wanted to know, because I'm trying to instill in my children, especially my daughter, that she's got a uniqueness to her. She's got a unique purpose. She's got a unique field that she brings into this earth. And that field and that purpose is so important, just as important as someone else's. So purpose is a significant pillar that I'm trying to impart to her by modeling that and being around her. And the second is community, the people that actually are around her, that firstly accept her and love her, and thirdly bring that validate her and bring and see her value and her significance. So give us your sort of view, and I don't know if you've been asked this question, how would purpose and community affect the mitochondria? Because they must have an impact on the mitochondrial process if they are so important to longevity and health span. And we can talk about the 5 blue zones, and we can talk about going to my granny's village in Cyprus, in Greek heritage, and seeing how these people lived. You know, they didn't have deuterium depleted water. They didn't know about fasting. They didn't know about ketogenic diets. In fact, when I look at my granny up in the Cypriot villages, that they used to live off the land and eat a lot of carbohydrates. So tell us a little bit more about deuterium depletion in terms of, and mitochondrial health in terms of purpose and community.
That's a great question. You're right. I've never been asked that. But if you look at our blood, at our cells, it mimics exactly what we do on a macro level, which is we're social animals, we're social creatures. And I think part of that sociality is being around people like you that are trust and love. There's love and trust, and that puts you in a safe space. So safe space is really important, because if you consider human evolution, or evolution of all creatures, everything in nature is always hungry and trying to eat everything else, right? So everybody's in a constant fight or flight mode. So anytime you can get into this rest and recover space, it's very important, because it's the only time that anything ever actually happens on an evolution scale when it comes to new ideas, new thoughts, and even physical recovery. It only happens in a parasympathetic state. So I think the community, it's so important to get into that parasympathetic state. And along with that parasympathetic state, what does a community and a trust among people create? It produces oxytocin. So this is an important chemical that we love. It's very tied into everything from childbirth to love. So I think that on that level, but how does DDW factor into this? What comes to mind is this: there was one of the original researchers, scientists in this deuterium depletion space in the water, a Russian guy from the 50s. Later on in life, he started a wing of a university. It was called it was a study of, he called it juventology, right? And he wrote some books, and in one of his books, I found something that was quite remarkable, because it explained things that we have very little explanation for, and that is the migration of animals, the migration of whales, of birds, of land mammals. They go all the way up north to this harsh environment, and they brave getting there altogether, right? And the young and the old, they all try to make it over there, and then when it gets too cold, they come back, or to an environment that's more hospitable. So why are these migration cycles existing in nature? It all has to do with deuterium. They are going to that place where there's a slight reduction in deuterium, in the hopes that they have a better chance of survivability for their young, for the next generation. In fact, the studies show that these are some of the most profound studies, because they're multi-generational studies. In this case, it was done on mice, but it shows how a deuterium depleted environment over time not only creates more offspring, but healthier offspring, and healthier offspring have bigger brains, and then bigger brains lead to not always, but lead to better logic faculties. Brilliant. But so I think this is somehow this ties in the community. I have to think of this question on a deeper level, but that's essentially what comes to me is how these migration cycles, giant population, birds, even the whales, for example, whales, they all have this deuterium depletion strategy where they, like the ones in Alaska, they hang out in the summer in Alaska, and then they drink all that glacial melt water. Then they fast for 3 to 4 months as they swim the warmer waters in Hawaii and give birth. And so they're fasting, they're deuterium depleting, and they're doing it as a community. This is a community strategy that they devised. So same thing, I think, early on in human populations, you have this, if you have a very smart community to take these factors into consideration, where do we put our communities, and in that regard, communities were set up in places where there was ample nutrition.
Yeah, good. But I want to stop you there, Victor, because I do want to press you, because I know that you're a genius and you can carry on talking. But if we've got a high sympathetic nervous system drive or sympathetic overdrive or a heart rate variability that's very low, I mean, I think the audience knows about heart rate variability, the difference between your PNS and your sympathetic nervous system. And I find it very, very valuable because people can measure it. They can do breath work. They can do mindfulness. They can do fasting. Absolutely. They can actually put things in place, and it's a good measure. But a low heart rate variability or high sympathetic nervous system drive or overdrive, what is it doing to a mitochondrial level? What is it doing to deuterium and then obviously your protons, your H plus? How is it changing your redox potential? How is it changing that channeling? Because obviously, if we look at process of being super stressed, everybody says, 80% of all chronic diseases is stress. But what is it doing from a deuterium depletion, having this low heart rate variability or being in a sympathetic overdrive?
That's another great question. Nobody asked me. We put a lot of thought into this. So what happens is, we get into a fight or flight response. And usually in evolutionary wise, we have to act on it, right? And that kind of clears the system of all the hormones that are produced in this situation. But in the modern sense, we get into this state. We produce these hormones that have to be processed out, but we're not going anywhere. We're experiencing these states while we're driving in our cars, while we're sitting on a couch. So this does a simple thing. It acidifies the system. Okay. Now, what does over acidity in the blood do? Inflammation. It just creates inflammation. Inflammation creates inflammasomes. What do inflammasomes do? They shut down the function of the cell. All these things affect the mitochondria because everything in the cell, even at a macro level of mitochondria, you're looking at the voltage differential between the cell and the actual cell and the blood or the plasma or whatever the cell is in the outer membrane space, the outer membrane spaces. And if that acidity changes a little bit, then your permeability of the cell completely changes, and then no nutrient is coming into the cell. And when there's a stifling of nutrition coming into the cell, it's going to cause your mitochondria to go into, your cell will go into senescence and then apoptosis. It's definitely a stressor. So any stress is going to at first it's going to amplify a system. It's going to hype up a system in order to get a response. And if the wrong response comes, it just doubles in on itself. And this is why, and this is the basis or where chronic inflammation starts.
Okay. So causing excessive oxidative stress. So we need
excessive oxidative stress.
Yeah. Good. Now I do want to talk about water. We're going to go into some of the other things like sunlight and my number one biohack, which is an infrared sauna. I'm in there 6 days a week. I just love the feeling. Yeah. I love what it does. And, so I'm going to talk about that, but let's talk about water, because some people are going to be listening now and saying, okay, I've got reverse osmosis. I've structured my water, I distill the water, then I structure it, then I remineralize it with Canton, and I do a whole bunch of things, and I try and get it as best. We don't have deuterium depleted water easily in South Africa. In fact, the research that I've done is we don't have it. So, I'd like to chat to you afterwards, because I think it's important for especially your cancer, your autoimmune, very, very sick people. But talk about just water. What should people be doing? And obviously, there's a whole continuum in terms of how much money you spend. But what practical steps can people take? Like, just do this. This is one of the most important. Then do this.
Well, when you look at water, you say, okay, what do I need to do to get back to water? Because what contaminants exist in water that we have to remove? Okay, if any. In some places there aren't many contaminants at all. In some places there are quite a bit. So that's your first question: is what contamination in there? The thing about deuterium depletion is we've discovered that there's a contaminant in water. It's a natural contaminant that we need to remove. So we've upped the standard of purification for water. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to do. That can't be done through normal means of distillation or reverse osmosis. So it's a new standard in purity. But what is the other standard in purity? Well, you want to get all the whatever toxic substances can be in that water, including water imprints things, right? So it'll take on energies, and those energies are going to affect you eventually somehow in a subtle way. So what should we be doing to water? Well, let me share a little story. So Victor Schauberger, your audience probably knows, and he did an experiment. Austrian water scientist, naturalist, father of modern water science. For those that don't know, Victor Schauberger, and his son is actually quite amazing as well. So he did an experiment, and the experiment goes like this: if you put yourself on a scale, and let's say you weigh 100 kilos, okay, and you put yourself on a scale and you drink a liter of water. Liter of water is 1 kilo, so you should be able to see yourself go up in weight by 1 kilo. So yeah, okay, sounds right, sounds accurate. Where else is it going to go? Well, turns out when he drank a liter of tap water, he went up to 101 kilos. You can see it on the scale. When he drank a liter of fresh spring water, it didn't move.
Sure.
What happened? Wow. What happened, right? So there's something quite unique about water, and we want to get water as close as possible to H2O, and we want to instill it with the right structure, and structure is I'm sure we can get deeper into, because it's an undefined term. Right. Structured water. Oh, my water structure. What does it mean? Nobody has the same definition. So.
Well, go for it. I think we need to talk about it. So are you talking about, you got a good system, a reverse osmosis. I mean, let me tell you about my water. You can go from there. I think it's a good exercise. I got a good under the prep bowl, reverse osmosis system. I then distill the water. I then place it then I remineralize it with something like a Canton or a mineral process, and then I put it next to a structuring somovedic device. With quite a bit of research, I found a big difference. So I've got a 4-step process, and then if I'm good and we've got some help at home, I then take that water and then put it out in the sun as best I can to try and get the sunlight on it. So that's what that's my personal process, and
that's
something
great
that we go through.
That's great. I have a theory that all water in the universe is one organism. And that organism is very much like a child. It can only exist in the state of love, bliss, harmony, joy, and anything that takes that away from it, it reacts. It doesn't like that. So because it's a fourth dimensional entity, and in the fourth dimensional, only love can exist, because it's the only thing that can be recursive upon itself. Everything else will break down and throw you back into this level. So and all water in the universe, when it's in a state of that joy and harmony, then everything is perfect. So what you're doing is wonderful. You're structuring the water in your own way, and this is the intention that you're putting into it. So it will have a structure. And what does structure mean? Well, for a long time, started in Russia. They were all touting the benefits of melted ice water. Okay. And why is that? Why can that have potential benefit? Well, it's very easy, because when water is structured, you mentioned Gerald Pollack. What he discovered is that easy water is different because it's water that's liquid, but it behaves like a liquid, but it looks like ice, meaning that it's in a crystalline form. It's basically compacted all the molecules into the most perfect structure it can, essentially like ice. In terms of not the density is different, which is most oddest thing about water, because its density is highest as a liquid, 39.5 degrees. But in ice, all the molecules are put together so it's nicely structured. Okay, it looks like a crystal. And this easy water is water that's not ice, it's liquid, but it's in that crystalline form. So you can imagine any impurities in a crystal change the purity of the crystal. Any impurities change, like if you look at a quartz crystal, any impurities will change the color, the opacity, the translucency, all of that, right? So same thing in our structured water. Any of these contaminants will change the structure of that water. It will put it out of structural integrity and harmony. So this is all we're trying to achieve with the water we're putting in our body. Get it as close to crystalline form as it can be, because that's the water that we're made of. The bulk water we put in has to be converted or has to be processed, or it may not even ever get to that cellular water stage, which is made from the simple reaction of the two hydrogens and oxygen. So it's quite amazing what's going down. And I think to understand water, we have to really understand hydrogen and oxygen completely. And then, even though water is a completely third entity, it's the perfect combination of these two atoms. And it's really profound. I mean, I can talk about this for hours. I'm sure. This is a subject that we all should be. It should all be. This should be taught in schools, like simple questions. Like what you're asking about your children. It's like, teach them how to learn, how to ask the right questions. Because if they go up to a professor and say, "Excuse me, can you explain what water is?" Says H2O. Like, no, but can you know? Like, no. It's so many simple things in nature that we have no explanation for, because we don't ask the right questions.
True. So now listen, we get into some type of arrangement. I bring out this deuterium depleted water. I mean, you've got 5 parts per million. I think on your website, you've got a whole bunch of different types, 10 parts per million. Who needs to drink deuterium depleted water? Here you are, we're on the podcast, and I can see you drinking DDW. DDW is deuterium depleted water. Who needs to drink? If I bring it to Africa and you supply me, who should be drinking deuterium depleted water? Because I see you've got a DDW test to test your levels of deuterium. And then things like cancer, the research knows that people that have got cancer got high levels of deuterium.
So we have two types of customers: those who can afford to drink the water, and those who can't afford not to. Those are your two types of people, and that pretty much covers everybody. So now everybody should be focused on a deuterium depletion strategy. Whether they have the ability to drink deuterium depleted water, that's a bonus, absolutely. But you should be focused on a strategy that keeps your own processes of deuterium depletion working properly. Now, so what we do by having a 5 and 10 ppm, let's just focus on the 10 ppm, because there's not much difference between 5 and 10, not in the long run. So if you take 10 ppm, and this is water that doesn't exist in nature. So some people drink it straight, but there's no need to. So what you do is you dilute it. So if you dilute it 4 times, so 1 part of 10 ppm and 4 parts of where your regular drinking water, I'll assume, is about 150 ppm, you get 122 parts per million, which is a long-term strategy, is incredible. It's absolutely incredible. Now, if you dilute it 1 to 1, you get 80 ppm. If you dilute 5 ppm 1 to 1 with 150 ppm, you get 77 ppm. That's why there's not much difference in the long run. So let's say you have this 80 ppm water. Also a fantastic strategy, but that's more for like biohackers, athletes, people that have some serious chronic condition. They're trying to gain the energy to fight it, you know. So in that sense, it's for everybody at different for different reasons, you know.
Okay, so it's like you've described it in simplified forms. Is this something, if you got autoimmune or if you got cancer, you're going to have a long strategy on? And how important would you say, you know, your DDW, you know, is in terms of if you've got one of these chronic conditions, you know, you got heart conditions,
when it comes to, let's talk about cancer first. So when it comes to cancer, there's one of the doctors that has been in this space the longest, and is Dr. Shumlai in Hungary. He's involved in one of the founders of Preventa, the other DDW water brand. And he, in the late 90s, he wrote a book called Defeating Cancer. And it's been almost more than 20 years since that book has been written. So he was very early in on this deuterium problem. And now, 20 years hence, he's up to over like 3,200 case studies, I believe. There's a massive amount of data. And what he found is that, and again, it's not the water, it's the environment, the deuterium depleted environment. He found that people that were deuterium depleted had a average survivability rate 8 times more than a person that was not deuterium depleted. So this is incredible. This is profound. So as an adjuvant for anybody that has a neoplastic condition, autoimmune condition, any type of chronic inflammatory condition, the best thing you can do is lower those deuterium levels. You can test them to know what they're at. That's true. We set up a testing lab so people kind of can follow their depletion. And most people are going to be relatively about the same as the water that they're drinking. So if your RO water is, if you tested it, it's 150, you will be about 150. Now, if you're a 148, that means you're doing something really right in your lifestyle and diet, meaning you're able to keep your deuterium levels lower than the water you consume. If you are above 150, 152, 153, some people get up to 155, then your other blood markers will probably prove that you are seriously, you have some serious chronic illness. And so the first thing to do is to take the burden off of your energy production system. In theory, you can have 6 times more proton motive force. That's in theory, but that's like in a lab in a vacuum. But really, what I've seen on a personal level is you can have twice the energy that you have now, that you've gotten used to at any age. You can double that. Wow. In fact, the studies that were done in Russia, I just came back with all the studies. I'm going to translate them into English, but very profound, very simple study, but very profound result. And we're going to try to recreate that here in the US. And that showed that after 30 days of drinking deuterium depleted water, athletes and non-athletes needed half the amount of oxygen to perform the same amount of work.
Wow, sure, that's profound.
So, that's profound. You know, profound. And it all has to do is freeing up mitochondrial energy. Now, when you free up that energy at the cellular level, how does it manifest? Everybody's different. You know, some people may have blocked methylation pathways. All of a sudden, those open up. Like, whoa, you know, they have going to detox. Some people, who knows? So this is that topic is complex and left to the medical professionals. But just in my review of the literature, it's quite incredible.
Fantastic. Tell us about sunlight, and it's the third pillar, and I think it's very important. Environment, how important your circadian clock is. Sunlight, I find one of the greatest ways to recover. I'm a ultra distant athlete. I run 11 Comrades. This Comrades is a race that's 56 miles. It's run every single year. I just love running. I think my genetic code was for running. I've run 35,000 kilometers in the last 25 years. I love being outdoors. I just love it. So sunlight, number one, and two, the electromagnetic radiation soup that we're in. How is that affecting our mitochondrial health?
Yeah, so start with the last thing you asked first. I think when you look at our biophysical aura, it doesn't stop here. You know, it extends a little bit. So I think that aura can be looked at as a biomagnetic as well. We do put off a magnetic field. And how strong or weak is your own magnetic field? Because that's going to keep other things out, just like the Earth. look at the Earth's magnetic field. It keeps a lot of stuff out. And if that magnetic field was weaker or non-existent, we probably wouldn't be alive because of the solar wind, et cetera, et cetera. So we have our own type of force field. Okay. And how strong is that force field? To cultivate that force field is to do these things that you love. I can appreciate the running. Early on, I was just obsessed with running when I lived in Kauai. I would bike, I would run, I ran a marathon. It was awesome. But it was a temporary interest, but I enjoyed it. 5 miles a day, I joined the track. I did track in college. It was great. And I would see that the kinetic movement, the actual movement, when you get into the meditative flow of the kinetic movement, actually produces energy rather than removes it. That's why these ultra marathoners, when they get good form, they can go for like 100 miles, and because your kinetic movement, if you get it just right, you become like a battery, and then you're no longer breathing; you're being breathed by the universe. So I understand that. I understand that the attraction, the draw to that. To running, because at some point you're no longer running, you're just in space, you're just existing in space, being breathed, and it's a wonderful heightened experience. So and sunlight is part of that experience, right? Because nobody and sunlight, what does sunlight do? It especially 660 or 663 nanometer spectrum, it stimulates mitochondrial production. It stimulates your body to produce mitochondria. It increases mitochondrial energy, and when energy is increased through the hormetic effect, through hormesis, you will induce mitogenesis. So when you're running, when you're exercising, you're inducing new mitochondria to be formed, because just as a survival strategy, just as a hormetic effect, So that's phenomenal. And in fact, when you run or do any type of like this physical exercise, that's a full body exercise, I forget what the actual number is, so don't quote me on this, but after a month of exercise, you actually have I think it's a liter more blood in your body. So you're actually producing more blood cells, and so you're increasing the number of cells in your body, which is increasing your ability to oxygenate. So increasing oxygenation is synonymous one-on-one with mitochondrial health, right? Because the more mitochondrial health, the more mitochondria you have, the better you'll be able to utilize oxygen. Which you'll be able to have better physical performance, mental performance, etc. And these things they all exist in a very precarious, balanced state. But the beauty of it is, if you are a healthy person, it's very hard to get a healthy person sick, and it's very hard to get a sick person healthy. So, in that's
good.
That's the paradox.
So good. I do want to move now. Obviously, sunlight, you got your infrared, you got your light, which is very important. I understand you got your photoreceptors and your mitochondria. They're very, very important to help your mitochondria from working.
Well, one other thing, if I can interrupt you while I'm thinking of it, is you mentioned saunas, and I'm a big sauna fan. Being Russian, it's very cultural. But the sorry, I thought I had it on mute.
No.
So the act of the banya, the sauna, for me, what I found is like from birth, I have a chronically slightly lowered body temperature. And some people run slightly hotter, some people run slightly lower. I run slightly lower. So when you get to that 98.6 degrees, that's when the magic happens. So the art of sweating obviously is to remove toxins, but it's also to equalize you once you get out of the sauna, to equalize you, get back to your body temperature that you absolutely need to be at. And that happens. The reason you need to be at 98.6, there's some fundamental esoteric reasons for this, based on biological transportation of elements and calcium, potassium pump. But so you need to be so every time if you run hot, you'll have to be dealing with inflammatory condition. If you run low, you'll be dealing with you'll be running with a enzymatic process that is not at full capacity. That is not at your full optimal. So these are the little things, man. The little things is what matters the most.
Sure.
But
let's move on to nutrition. Obviously, keto diets and fat metabolism and how important that is. And then fasting, you speak about dry fasting. I understand why. Obviously, if you add in high levels of deuterium and you're drinking water at 150 parts per million, it's going to defeat the object that you're trying to sort of achieve in autophagy and a lot of all the things that happen when you fast. But tell us how important fasting is from deuterium depletion, as well as what you think about certain specific, nutritional eating plans.
This is how important fasting is. For every it's almost a 1-to-1 ratio, but for every kilo of fat that you burn, you produce about a liter of deuterium depleted water. So it's very important.
So can I just ask a question there? Because we do a lot of CGM, continuous glucose monitoring, seeing where the glucose is, and then measuring ketones and looking at BHB, beta hydroxybutyrate, and looking at those levels. So when you're burning fat, you produce acetoacetate, you produce beta hydroxybutyrate. So what level should it be that you then, once you're burning fat, your own endogenous, your own internal fat, what levels do you look for if you're going to be measuring the ketones in order for you to be burning fat and producing DDW?
It's a good question. I'm not quite sure because I'm not a constant. I don't constantly monitor every biomarker myself. I just kind of know if things are working or not working. But you certainly want to be in a keto adapted state, and without outside monitoring devices, how do you know that you've achieved this? Well, for one is you don't go into a hypoglycemic stress. You're never hungry. You're never hungry. You're never like, I gotta eat. You don't have that stress response. You can go for a day or 3 without eating. You're very hydrated. For example, I can be out in the hot sun and sitting in a hot spring and not be thirsty. And when my friends just chugging water away, I go, Vic, what's wrong with you? You don't want to drink? I go, I'm observing myself because I'm not thirsty. So being well hydrated is really important, and being well hydrated has nothing to do with how much water you consume. So and the eating side, you have to get to the point where you can go for long periods of time not eating, and this is part of our evolutionary makeup. We have a genetic predisposition for gorging on a lot of food and then not eating for a long time. So the other thing to look at is how quickly you get up in the morning. Are you sluggish, or are you just like, you're up, or how quickly you fall asleep? That's another one. They take forever. So these are the biomarkers that I look for. Not necessarily testing everything. I'm not saying testing shouldn't be done. I think as much of a window you can get onto things is important. But it's in my reality, I'm not.
Okay. Tell us about sort of these centenarians having a high carbohydrate diet. Was it just because they were so physically active outside, they were having a lot of sunlight, they were grounding? Because it seems like, if I look at my grandparents, they couldn't afford meat. In fact, my own father, sometimes when he was young, they could only afford meat once a month, red meat once a month. He didn't have much, and they used to eat a high carbohydrate diet. But when I look at all his brothers and sisters, big families, no one was overweight. People were, although they had these high carbohydrate diets. Tell me a little bit about nutrition if someone's thinking about that.
I asked a very famous yoga master one time, says, why do we do yoga? And his answer was, just to move the blood around. So that's what we do. That's why they're healthy. They're moving, they're exercising, they're moving blood around. They're caloric. They're not storing the carbohydrates. They're burning them. So in an efficient system, all those carbs are going to break down the glucose, produce ATP, and so that glucose. Now, a ketone body is 4 times more efficient. You'll produce 4 times more ATP from ketones than you will from glucose. But if everything's running fine, it's still an energy source. So what's great about the human body is we're incredibly adaptable. We're so adaptable. I mean, you can survive on a hemp seed a day, for 40 days. You can survive. You can survive on nothing. You could be an autotroph. I've met them, what other people refer to as breatharians. So we're incredibly adaptable, and I think it all has to do with our emotional balance. To circle back to that, is by far the most important thing. I mean, if I see I see a happy person eating a Big Mac and an unhappy person, eating whatever the latest, whatever, a $30 ketogenic meal is. I'm gonna put my money on the Big Mac eater because he's happy.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah, that's
every
profound.
time.
Yeah. Sure,
Every
that's
time.
good. Maybe give us a little bit of your details on fasting, because dry fasting, and we've been speaking about fasting for 2 years at Made to Thrive, bone broth fasting. And then some people fast with bulletproof coffee, or they have coffee. But you're introducing deuterium, like you said, whatever you drink.
That's not fasting. That's just cleansing, because fasting is fasting. It shouldn't corrupt the word, and fasting is either done with water fasting or dry fasting. And then people, of course, oh, I'm juice fasting, or I'm steak fasting. So no, but the thing about it is that I read a book by a Ukrainian doctor who was treating these people that were exposed to heavy radiation from Chernobyl, and the ones he dry fasted lived, and the ones he didn't died.
Sure.
So I'm like, I got to try this. I did some, I did water fasts in my 20s, 12 days, I think was the longest.
Wow.
And then I tried the dry fasting. How long can I go? And my first time I did 4 days, no food or water. And then I'm able to do 6 days. Wow. But ever since I started doing deuterium depleted water, I haven't had the desire to do dry fasting, because it accomplishes the same thing, which is the reduction of deuterium. And so that's really, I think the real scientific reason for the fasting is to reduce the deuterium levels in their bodies. And there's more to that. For one, it's a pattern interrupt. Okay, so a pattern interrupt ultimately can be a pattern reset. And so it forces you to focus on triggers. You have all these triggers that you don't even think about. Oh, we're going to grab that. Something triggers this. Oh, this condition, this mental state triggers me getting something from the fridge, or getting a drink, because we have these comfort triggers. And then when you cut those out of your life, you really start to analyze your brain processes and what your trigger points are. And so that's why I tell people, the mental benefit is just as profound as the physical, because skip a meal, skip dinner and skip breakfast, and don't drink anything in that time. First it'll remove that fear that most people have been programmed in from a young age. You'll die.
Yeah,
you can't drink, you need to eat, you'll die. And I'm like, here I am, 6 days, no food or water, and I'm still urinating. I'm like, something's going on here. Now you are losing a massive amount of weight as you're doing it, but not muscle. You're not losing muscle. It's just burning all the fat that you have on your body. So you can potentially get into a starvation mode. But if I were to give any little bit of advice for serious dry fasters out there, and how not to panic and how not to go, okay, convince yourself I got to stop now, because you'll have pains, you'll have things, things you're going to be going through stuff at first. But as long as you have saliva, as long as you can still build up saliva in your mouth, you're totally safe, completely 100% safe. And this is something I've observed with people that have gone longer than me. I know 2 women that have done 10 days. I haven't met them, but I know somebody that's done 14 days. And then I met these human anomalies that are autotrophs. They don't need any food or water, and I've observed them, and enough to believe that they've turned on some other energy production mechanism in their body, which I've studied as well. Which, if there's something esoteric that defies explanation, why not ask the question and say, well, why? We can figure this out. So, and usually when you ask the question, there's a bit of a time delay, but eventually the answer comes. Yeah. And so the dry fasting is more powerful than water fasting, because you just cut everything out, and you learn that first you realize that you need very little. Like, we humans consume way too much food, just way too much water, way too much food, way too many liquids. Our bodies are designed to be to run very optimally, and we don't run them at optimal at all. Look at like where we started this podcast with the electron transport chain and the nanosynthase and the ATP nanosynthase motor. You're looking at something at 9,000 RPM per second. It's 100% translation of energy at its optimal. We can't do that in any machine that we create. So, but yet it's the machine that we are made of. but at its optimal. So we're not running our bodies at optimal. And you really get to see this when you see like some very advanced yogis and some very advanced athletes. You go, wow, that's what optimal performance looks like. Not what we think it is. So we're basically running at 50% physically and mentally. So when you dry fast, it's going to optimize you a little bit more. And every time you do it, it will become more optimal. However, the danger is in coming out. You know, if you come out wrong, then it'll just, it's like a rubber band. It'll hit your back. So.
Great. Two last areas I just want to talk about. One is your company, drinklitewater.com. If people are listening, we've got a listenership in the US and we've got obviously a big listenership here in Africa. If they want to get DDW or they want to do the test, which I think I would love to do the test and see where I'm at, what can they do or where can they go?
So two websites. One is drinklitewater.com. That's DRINKLITEWATER. We spell Lightwater, LITE, not LIGHT. So it's drinklitewater.com and deuteriumtest.com. DEUTERIUM, deuteriumtest.com.
And do you send the test here? Say if I want to do it now and I've got to know you, Victor, you send the test to me. I actually then test and send it back to you. Do we use a courier or how does it work for international clients?
International, it's difficult because you're testing saliva, so it's body fluids. There is a way around it, and we could discuss that.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
Essentially, I'll send you a kit. You send it back.
Okay. Brilliant. And then the last thing is you're going to be at the Biohacking Congress, and Julia put us together. You're going to be speaking there, and obviously it's been an incredibly informative podcast already, and we're going to be offering a 50% discount to the Made to Thrive community with a code that you can find in the show notes for the online attendees. There are going to be 1,000 attendees online. There are going to be obviously people that can physically go there. I think it's in Florida. It's in October. Tell us a little bit more about the Biohacking Congress, your involvement, and why you think it would be beneficial for the audience to attend either online or in person.
Well, a big thanks to Julia for putting us two together. And, really excited about the Biohacking Congress. We're a platinum sponsor. And one, I'm excited because it's an actual event with people in this land. It's not a Zoom, for some it's a Zoom event, but for us there'll be 200 or so people. So I'm excited about that. And it's always nice to be in a space where everybody's focused on figuring out the same problems and giving solutions to the same problems. And so I like being around people that are trying to advance. I mean, biohacking is a term. I health optimization is another term. Whatever we decide to call it. But they're advancing alternative medicine and human performance.
Okay, maybe I can ask you a question. Who are you excited to listen to at the Biohacking Congress? We do have the code. It's called HACK50 to get 50% off those online tickets for anyone who's listening, but we will put that in the show notes. But who is Victor Sagalovsky?
I haven't looked at who's speaking.
Okay. No problem. It's on October the 16th and 17th for people that are listening. I really got someone who's been incredible with his time.
That's the beauty, is you're always going to find something that you didn't expect at these conferences.
Brilliant.
Every conference I've gone to, you always walk away with something you didn't expect, whether it was a speaker that made you think in a different way or opened you up to some bit of information. So that's why I'm excited.
A last question, young Victor, because the way you're going with the water and putting these things in place, I don't think you're going to be aging nearly as quickly as 99% of people out there. Tell us, what question have I not asked you that you would like me to ask or that you'd like to tell the audience?
Wow. It's a good... I don't know. I don't know. My mind is a blank slate this morning. So what question that you haven't asked me? I mean, you've been so thorough and your questions have been unique and really encouraged me to think in a way that, so the more, for me, there's a lot crammed up in here, and it only takes the right questions to unlock it. So if the right questions are asked, then I find myself almost channeling the information that's in my brain rather than willingly willingly share. So if you say, okay, what can I share with you that you haven't asked? I don't know.
You're not sure. Or maybe it'll work on your subconscious mind, and we can do a part 2 maybe after the Congress, or
Yeah, no,
6 months time.
that's the thing. It's like the brain is like a search engine. You put in the question, and then you wait for it to come through. But we didn't talk about ketone. What one thing we didn't talk about.
Okay. Well, give us maybe your shortened version there, how important they are.
Little sound bites is what is really important. So to me, the one I love is Rene Quinton himself, the one that started this whole movement of bringing this marine plasma to the world. And he said that in order for life that started out in the oceans to exist on land, to survive on land, it had to bring the ocean with it.
Wow.
So
profound.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I take it twice a day. I take a little ampule of it. How important do you think it is in terms of people's health? We've got it here in South Africa. It's not the cheapest. I see you do the sachets on your website, which I think will be probably far easier to get out here. We can maybe chat to you about that. But how important is Quinton to someone's health?
It has the same exact mineral profile as human blood. Okay, you can actually transfuse yourself. They did this in 2 world wars and even recent studies where they remove 99% of someone's blood and they replace it with ketone. And the subject, sure, it's agonizing, the poor animal, but it doesn't die. Because essentially it's the blood of the ocean is the blood in the veins. So how important is it? Well, how important is proper mineralization? The thing is, you want the good insurance policy for your longevity and for your health. And the best insurance policy is the full periodic table of elements in their proper proportion in your body. So if you live on the ocean and you spend a lot of time in the water, it's maybe not that important because you're getting it. If you live in the mountains in an isolated village, maybe it is important. Maybe you live in a more modern type of environment. I'll tell you again. For me, a lot of this is experiential, and I lived in Hawaii for a long time, and I was in the ocean every day, twice a day, and so I never felt like I was demineralized. And then I moved to Los Angeles, and within 6 months, I felt like something was missing. I'm like, something's missing. I'm not, and I started taking ketone, and that balance was restored, that mineral balance. So I think it's very important. And I think the more stressed people, the more stressed you are, and the more stressful environment you are in, the more important it is.
Fantastic. Well, I want to just declare blessing and favor over you, Victor. I want to see your dreams come true, that you would reach your fullest potential, that you would be the most incredible human being, and that your magnetic field, we've had entanglement now, and I'm grateful that our souls and our fields have connected, and hope that we can chat soon. I won't be able, just with a C-19 and traveling over to the US at this stage is not going to be a possibility for myself or my family. But I just want to thank you for your calling, and then hopefully we can cross paths with, your drinklitewater.com. I'd like to investigate that. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve. We will see each other down the trail.
Brilliant.